I'm JD Pincus, and I'm a social psychologist by training. I started off my career at a time what was sort of the height of the cognitive revolution, where it was sort of an information processing, model, if you will, of how we make decisions and how we do what we do, what ultimately affects our behavior. That never really sounded right to me. I believed that emotions were much more important. They certainly were in my life and the people I knew, and that all of that sort of hyper-rationalism seemed to be missing the point. It also completely obliterated any possibility of a spiritual sense, which I think is primarily emotional. So I basically spent my whole career, I think hopefully, proving that emotions do matter. And, we were vindicated eventually. This, band of us who kind of, survived the cognitive revolution, and, it led into a period where there's fMRI studies and all the work of, Daniel Kahneman got the Nobel Prize for prospect theory, which is essentially behavioral economics, showing that people make irrational decisions based on emotion all the time, as if that needed to be proven, but it was proven. And most recently, I've written this book, here I shall lift up here, The Emotionally Agile Brain, mastering the 12 emotional needs that drive us. And I've created this model that basically proposes that there are 4 domains of human life. The sort of the self, the social, sort of, we're concerned about myself and my own development versus the social, my concern about relationships with other people. Then there's the material, sort of work, play, money, things like that. And then there's the spiritual, which is things you can't see, like principles, ethics, justice, purpose, meaning, right? And all of those are the 4. And I basically showed that every one of the 5 major world religions proposes those 4 in that same sequence. And that it's not just that, it's religion, philosophy, psychology. This is not a concept that is mine. It's a concept that I'm simply borrowing. And then I cross those 4 by Aristotle's modes of existence. And his modes of existence are a sort of foundational state of existence, or pure potential. There's a sort of a becoming state, which I call sort of experiential. And then there's an aspirational state, which is sort of actualization, which essentially is like past, present, future. And when you cross these 4 domains of human life by these 3 modes of existence, you end up with 12 cells. Lo and behold, those 12 cells hold every mini theory of motivation that's ever been proposed, from Maslow's hierarchy of needs to McClelland's, need for affiliation, achievement, power. Any major theorist you can think of. I've done the work. I've basically shown through multiple, literature reviews that it basically accounts for every single one of them. The one other difference about my model is that it proposes that each one of those cells has a positive face and a negative face, right? I can want more of the good. I can want more of a feeling of security, or I can want less of a bad. I can want less of feeling of anxiety. So we measure both sides of them. So basically that's the model. And now I've taken it to lots of different places, to looking at different populations, being able to use this technique to characterize the emotional well-being of populations at the population level, so among like college students or middle school students, high school students, even down to kindergarten. We're doing this in Ukraine. We're doing it in Nigeria. Doing it in the United States, and with great success. Just also published a paper that basically applies it to neurodiversity and the sort of, people with autism, ADHD, people with OCD, PTSD, all of those kinds of conditions, and showing that it doesn't just characterize how they're doing, but also can let you know what are the unmet needs in their life. What is the actual experience of having those conditions like? And what is the specific deficit, the unmet need that they need? And that helps you design interventions. So that's a little bit more than just me. It's sort of what I'm doing, but I'll pause there.
That is so great, and thank you for that introduction, JD. It's great, and to our listeners, I would just add on to your introduction that, the work that you've done, it totally reimagines the scholarship itself, right? Listeners, JD Pincus's work is not just, neurons or numbers. It stretches beyond that, and he has mentioned that for us. And I just invite you and to this show, and even JD invites us to reconsider whether knowledge is, something without consciousness, and if it is without consciousness, can it ever be called wisdom, and what is the whole strata of it, and what all ambits does it come under? So yes, grab a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and we'll dive in. Thank you so much for your introduction, and it was so great knowing about your work, knowing about you. And there is this one question that I have. It's sometimes controversial, but Western academia, it has grown from Enlightenment ideal, that reason could liberate humanity, and that is the universal thing that everybody follows. Yet, centuries later, we find ourselves intellectually advanced, but existentially adrift from ourselves, from the society, and from our well-being. So, what do you think that the Enlightenment got right about knowledge, or what essential human dimension did the Enlightenment leave behind, or what is it? What is your take on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point and a keen observation that, the sort of embrace of the scientific method, rationality, intellectualism, produced major gains, huge gains in terms of technology, science, democratic values, codes of law. Um, but its frailty is that it was so hyper-rational that it sort of relegated the emotional world to a sort of a thing we might be better off without. That we were so proud of our intellectual abilities as humans, and it's very language based and analytical, mathematical, that we wanted to almost disassociate ourselves from our sort of animal roots, which is basically our emotional systems. And what recent research has shown is that the whole reason that we even have consciousness is because we needed to have cognitive flexibility with how to react to different situations, being informed by our emotion systems. So Damasio, for instance, says our emotional systems are essentially there to tell us how our body is doing, right? That's why, you get stress, your heart starts to race, your palms sweat. It's because your body is getting ready to either fight or flee, right? Uh, that's a pretty good system that it works for most animals, but we have complex social relationships. So we needed some more cognitive flexibility to figure out how to manage the situation. And that's the whole reason that we even have consciousness and language, was to simply give us another set of tools. But without the emotional basis, we have nothing. There is nothing. And he's shown that. And there's been so many experiments that have shown this, where people who have damage to their emotion systems are able to intellectually process arguments, and they can debate with themselves and others about the fine points of things. But when it comes to actually just making a simple decision, they're totally incapable. They cannot make a decision. He had an example of one of his patients who would talk about endlessly about the merits of, one appointment time versus another appointment time, or different day and different time, and simply couldn't say this is the one, because that requires emotion. And so your emotion is very tied to your motivation. Without the emotion, without the motivation, we're not human. We're not even anything at that point. We're just basically like a computer. And the emotional side is so basic and so fundamental. It's amazing that it was sort of skipped for all that period. But if you go back and you look carefully at some of the major thinkers like Spinoza and David Hume, it turns out they were well aware of this, and they made this point quite explicitly. Adam Smith, with Wealth of Nations, he wrote an entire book that's almost unknown unless you're a psychologist. It talks about the moral sentiments. And it's basically talking about how nobody does anything unless they feel something first. Hume said the same thing. Spinoza said the same thing. So it's there. It just kind of got, shoved aside. But there's a long tradition.
That is so true, so true. And thank you for mentioning all these philosophers and all these theorists who have actually made an attempt. There is also this thing that I find, and it's my observation, that the academia that we refer to as of now, being into the system myself, like learning about it, it's that we are mostly just taught what is, just relevant for your syllabus. For example, you mentioned Adam Smith, right? And Wealth of Nations, it's much more about just economics being about, distributing resources. It's much more than that. And it is, as you mentioned, all about emotions and how, one science of economics can be related to emotions and all of that. So that is somewhere we lack. And talking about that and bringing that up on the platform is actually something that we can do. And thank you for doing that. Also, your work, it sits at the intersection of neuroscience and emotional agility. You've mentioned that, and we've been talking about that. So, in a world where cognitive performance is actually, it is optimized, but inner coherence, it is eroding. We're very sharp cognitively, but the inner coherence that we have, it's eroding or it's suppressed. So how can a research begin to integrate this, and how to, feel that texture or experience without dissolving the rigor, or yeah, how to actually not just erode it but also bring it out and keep a balance of it.
Yeah, I think the clearest example of what you're talking about is people who are otherwise very able, very capable. They are aware of what's going on in the world. They can tell you, they're sort of cognitively, intact. They can tell you who the president is and what year it is and what month it is. But and we have done this research with thousands of people who are full-time working people for mid to large size corporations in the United States, right? So these are people who are highly functional, right? They are keeping their jobs. A lot of them are managers, a lot of them are senior managers. And yet they hold on to these beliefs that are beyond insane. Like, like they believe it's about 20, 25, up to 30% of the population that believes that NASA faked the moon landing, that when you get tested for COVID, the government is implanting a device inside you to track you, that, that the world is flat, that and I have a whole series of these things. And the people will go down the list and they'll say, yeah, I think that's a good chance that that's true. And I think that's because we have favored sort of rational skepticism over emotional awareness, to a point where it's sort of cool to deny reality. It's sort of totally reasonable to say, there is no such thing as an objective standard of ethics or justice, or there's no way to qualify a purpose as being legitimate or not. Everything is so relative. It's all this cultural relativism taken to such an extreme that nobody can be trusted. A fact is no longer a fact. That every fact is, what do they call it? Sort of impregnated with theory, and that if the theory is wrong, the fact goes with it. Uh, this was sort of an unfortunate byproduct of the extreme rationalism that brought us to this point. And now it sort of left us with this legacy of that nothing is ultimately real. It's whatever you want it to be. And I think that's where it flies in the face of biology. It's where it flies in the face of chemistry, physics, and emotions, because that's the building blocks. And in fact, there's a whole bunch of things that people around the world would consider to be unethical, even though there's no victim. I talked about this in the book. I won't talk about that whole list because it's kind of unpleasant, but that's whole list of these things. And the reason that everyone around the world finds them to be unethical is because of the emotions that they elicit. There's something just wrong about them. And that wrongness is our access, our emotional connection to the spiritual. And that's where we're actually able to connect and say, oh, yeah, there is a real reality here that we can't violate. There is a ground truth, a source truth that we are at risk of violating if we try to overthink it and over rationalize and over intellectualize everything. So I think what you were saying, your point is well taken, that you can lose, throw out the baby with the bathwater, overthinking everything, you lose, you know, even what's most basic and fundamental to your life.
That is so, so true. And mentioning that it's literally applicable to everything, right? We are all living in this delusion where also the culture of the cancel culture, it totally supports everybody's delusions that, there is a whole different theory for it, wherein in reality it is very well proven, or there are theories that um actually support it, but it's again the perspectives and the perceptions that keep on revolving, and those are also to be appreciated sometimes, because they give the way for actually talking about it, and for actually analyzing and scrutinizing what is right and what is wrong. And yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Also, I was going to talk about your book, which is, you mentioned already, The Emotionally Agile Brain. First of all, great title of a book, and it actually interests me a lot. Um, you explore adaptability, and you explore it as the nervous system, um, and its superpower, right? So, how does spiritual awareness, or awareness of interconnectedness among people and societies, how does that reshape our understanding of emotional health? And what is the classification and what are the sources of it?
Yeah. So if we kind of go back to my model and we think about it, there's sort of two developmental paths you can take. One developmental path, the sort of more basic one, is to make forward progress in every single one of the life domains. So if I'm feeling within myself, I'm feeling unsafe, then I'm not going to share much of myself. I'm not going to really express my true individuality. If I do feel safe, then I can do that. I can express myself. And that's really my first opportunity to achieve my full potential. You're never going to achieve your full potential if you can't express yourself in your own words. If you try to sound like your professor or your boss, your mentor, your ChatGPT, you're not going to get there. It's the same thing in the material domain. You want a sense of autonomy. You want to feel independent. I can take action. I have permission and ability. I'm going to take action. Then I'm going to immerse myself in the moment, and I'm going to do some amazing stuff, and it's going to feel good, and the time's going to fly by, and lo and behold, I've created something amazing, and that's when you achieve success. It's the same thing with social. You need to feel included in your group, your tribe, your family. Once you do, you can begin to form the sort of deeper one-on-one relationships around caring. And then from doing that for a lifetime, you'll get rewarded with, validation, respect, affirmation, all of those good things. In the spiritual domain, it starts with the basic notion of justice, that good is rewarded, bad is punished. If you don't have that, it's very hard to make any more progress in the spiritual domain. But if you do have that, then you can begin to think about limiting self-interest, which is the essence of ethics, right? It's like, I'm not going to lie about what my product can do, in order to sell it, because that is me trying to advantage myself over the other person. Uh, if you have justice and ethics in place, that's your first opportunity to actually explore a higher purpose, because it has to be built on a foundation of justice and ethics. And it's not me saying that; that's basically every theologian who's ever lived, from Martin Luther King to Thomas Aquinas to Maimonides. I mean, they all basically make the same argument. So that's one direction of kind of development, right? Going from the foundational level upward. The other way is to go from the self to the spiritual, and sort of decentering, which is something that Erickson talked about. You're basically starting with sort of developmentally focus on yourself, your needs only. Then you begin to become aware of the material, that the world is actually not just an extension of you. It's a separate thing, and that it has its own rules that you have to abide by. Then there's the sort of concern for other people, the sort of social concerns. Then you can begin to kind of get into that, and that's really focused mainly on people right? It's on people who you're related to, people well, kin. Um, and then finally, the next level of decentering is to take the principles of the social domain and extrapolate them to people you don't know, right? To strangers. So here, kindness, fairness, inclusiveness, respect, they begin to apply those to, excuse me, a sneeze coming, but then it went away. Mm. And that, I think, is sort of the highest level, is like now we're basically dealing in principle. So that, to me, is these two different directions of movement describe the relationship between sort of how our emotions and our emotional needs lead us from a pure, focus on self and our own survival, all the way up to a higher purpose that it transcends ourselves, transcends our possessions, transcends even the people we know in our relationships, to some kind of a higher purpose. So you're going sort of from the top, bottom left to the top right, if you will. And then I have this interesting, I think, chapter at the end of the book that talks about, so is that it? These are the 12 and that's it. And I say, well, basically, we can keep going, but it becomes speculative. We can say what happens next in terms of human evolution is we get to that point and we begin to transcend boundaries. So the thing that I do for myself and my needs actually helps serve other people. The things that I do for my work actually serves the higher spiritual purpose. So the differences begin to collapse. And that's why I use a pyramid metaphor, because it narrows to a point at the top. So as we move up and across these dimensions, they begin to collapse into the point that we have one sort of undifferentiated need that is ethical, moral, just, but also self-serving and other-serving, and healthy for ourselves and others and for the planet and the universe. So that's sort of the long-winded answer.
I love that. I love that. And your book, it actually, talks about a lot of things wherein the society, it actually needs to understand, and it needs to read through these theories and these perspectives as well, because we're very fixed to a point in understanding about what just is, what other things are. And thank you for mentioning that. And I hope our listeners, they actually visit your book, and they actually get through all these insights and wisdom that you are sharing with us. Thank you for that. You mentioned ChatGPT, although it was an example, but it gave me the idea of AI, and it reminded me of that. Artificial intelligence, it's literally just, a mirror to your cognition, right? And nowadays, like earlier when AI was just a concept, it was in the market, it was new to the market, it was just these thoughts that were coming up. But now it's pretty much more than that, and AI can do whatever humans can, and that's wonderful. And as it has its own drawbacks, right? But it mirrors it mirrors cognitiveness, but it fails to mirror consciousness, which is fine as it's AI. It can't do that. So, if academia, it continues to sideline the spirituality concept of it, are we in danger of creating a civilization which has all thoughts, which is all thought, but it forgets meaning? It is forgetting meaning, but it's all cognitively very sound, and emotionally it's suppressed. So, what is your take on that?
So that's another really interesting point. And I think I have a optimistic answer, which is that we have been training our own LLM, our own RAG, to create the ability for people to explore their emotional needs, including things like meaning and purpose and ethics and justice and, what is, respect look like? Those kinds of really important questions, because AI, interestingly, it will, like as you say, it will mirror whatever you feed it. So what we've done is fed it my book. We fed it, a lot of my other writings, a lot of other things that other people have written. And what it's able to do now is actually engage in a dialogue with you that's meaningful about these topics, which I think is really important, because one of the things I'm most excited about is getting this out into schools to teach kids a language for talking about their emotional needs, and being able to articulate them and to really speak deeply about them and focus on them and raise them as a concept and say, I'm not comfortable with this because I feel like it's limiting my authenticity, or it's something where I'm feeling excluded because, and or I'm not feeling cared for, I'm not feeling recognized. This is not letting me become immersed. Like I can't get into the flow because you keep interrupting me. That, all of these things are fundamental human needs. And if people can learn about them and we could program them into AI, as we've done, you're then able to explore, so what is this happening? How can I change my situation? How can I, modify these relationships? What are the kinds of things I can do proactively in order to try to fix this? And my hope is that this will be a way to kind of take what's best about AI and infuse it with, some real emotional understanding, to make it actually useful to people. And so they don't need to go to a psychiatrist or a therapist to get this information. They can just have it right at their fingertips.
So true, so true, so true. And I think this conversation brings us to this end. And thank you for all the insights that you've shared. And I truly resonate with your idea and your perspective of inculcating AI and actually, making it a part, and rather than, just thinking it of a whole different thing, because we are only making it and it can serve different purposes. And that's all that I have for it. Um, what a rare and necessary conversation we've had with you today. And it always makes me feel better, and it reminds us that, intellect, it is nothing without, you know, looking at our it's intellect is nothing without emotions and looking at our surroundings, and actually, understanding that these are not different sciences. These are literally the amalgamation of each other. And it's high time that we understand that. And thank you for all your insights. I loved it. And it was such a beautiful conversation. So thank you for this opportunity that you've given to us. And I would love to host you furthermore. And for our listeners, um, as you return to your studies, screens, and cells, remember that understanding the world begins with understanding the consciousness perceiving it. And that is all I have for you. This was Divine Decode. I am Fagemalia. Until next time, keep questioning deeply, feeling bravely, and decoding the divine within. That's all from my side. Signing off.